So as I was saying in the lecture, I'm really lucky. I've spent most of my life like living in this general region, and I've lived from north to south. So this being kind of the southern end of my home range, this is considered the Sandhills. I don't have the timelines, but this area was once a seabed. So like hence the sand, hence everything else. You move just west of here, Highway 220 for me is kind of the linear marker. So you get to the west side of 220, and you're getting into this Uwharrie mountain range. So some have said that the Uwharrie, I don't know how you would qualify this or quantify it, is the Uwharrie range is the oldest mountain range in the world. I don't put a whole lot of credence in that kind of talk, because you start getting into geological time and like, the continental shifting and stuff like that. So for me personally, like, we know it's old. It has a neat, a neat natural history that I think is worth understanding if you're going to be out in it. But when you come from where I am, we have this elevation of about 800 plus feet at the highest points. We start running south, so that's the northernmost area, right south of Salisbury, or actually right east of Salisbury, North Carolina. You get to the Yadkin River, and we start from about what we call Perkins Game Land, is maybe the northernmost public land on the Yadkin there. We come in to what used to be called Alcoa, now they call Yadkin River Game Land, and that is kind of the riparian buffer around the Yadkin chain of lakes. So that starts with High Rock Lake, was dammed in the 20s. So my family actually had a farm, my grandmother's side had a farm on a creek called Flat Swamp that runs off the very southeast side of High Rock. And so that's kind of my ancestral homeland. So I feel a real deep connection to the sense of place around this stuff. And so now there's a lake, bunch of $1 million homes, but still dotted with game lands all over. And when we're thinking of Woodcock and we think on that large scale, those big rivers and the highways, 220 being one of them, or north to south, those are our travel corridors for our birds. And you'll find them off of those travel corridors, but I think in our highest densities, those riparian areas, the river bottoms, the creek bottoms, that's what I focus on. So they might not always be in the bottom, but number one, that's where our access is. And then number two, we know that's natural habitat for those birds. So if you look around you now, we're in a drain essentially, right in here. And so you can look at that vegetation and see how inviting it looks, and recognize that would be a good place to start anyway, right? So thinking about Woodcock. So we're running north to south. We're up in the Yadkin River. High Rock, at the north end of High Rock is a very popular duck area, for which reason I do not hunt it for the most part, unless it's a Wednesday morning and I go to places I don't think other people will be. But as far as the Woodcock access, it's been gaining popularity, so that it's getting a little less elbow room than there used to be. But it's a heavily populated area. As we run south, we go from High Rock down to Tuckertown Lake, and we're starting to get a little more into the Uwharries. So the dam of High Rock, there's a ridge line that runs across there, and to me, you're in the Uwharries well north of that, but that's where, to me, it really starts, when you start to feel the relief. And so when I'm looking at the map, I'm looking for kind of funnels, and I'm thinking of the topography. So if I'm looking east, I can expect everything to kind of, from 220 east, going from Asheboro, say, over to Siler City, Sanford area. There's plenty of opportunities. You get in that area, you got game lands, you hunt where you can, but I'm out of my element because I'm using terrain as my primary kind of dictator of where I want to hunt, and so I'm looking at those funnel areas. I'm looking for my stream beds. I like to see those big flat areas. So when I'm looking at OnX, and right now we're kind of dialed into this space, this is going to be tough to show everybody, but the first thing I use is the topo feature. And so what that allows me to do, number one, is I can see my public space on here. It's marked in like blue dots. And then I can look all the way up the Yadkin chain. I can see my public land along it. And as I zoom in, I can start to see my contour lines and understand where my bottoms are. you know, what I have access to. And so that's the first thing I'm looking for. That's my big scale. As we kind of continue on, we get into the meat of the Uaris. So you come out of Tuckertown, and then that flows into Baden Lake. Baden Lake is really it's the heaviest relief in the Uwharrie mountain range. But it's interesting as you're coming out of that High Point area, or Lexington where I'm at, and you're coming off a High Point, especially being at that 800-foot elevation, you're actually going down in elevation as you increase in relief. And so it's a very interesting geological space, because that rarely happens. Usually as your relief increases, you're increasing in elevation at the same time. And so when you think about it from the bird's perspective, it would make natural sense for that bird to not be at the higher elevations, even though Jim being from West Virginia and us talking about being up high in the Appalachian chain and finding birds, when we're generalizing, that I would expect my higher densities to be in my lower elevations, especially amongst my relief. And so I like looking at it that way as I'm coming into the Uwharrie. So I spend a lot of time all over that area. And so early season, whenever I've got time, it's quick. I can be on game lands in 20 minutes from my house. As I travel south, it takes me maybe an hour to get down here, a little better, and I can be in the Uwharries in like 30, 40 minutes, depending on where I want to be. And so each one of those is a little different. It's a different feel to the hunt. And so I've got my big, broad river bottoms up on the north end of High Rock. As I come into the Baden area, I get really tight, like some of them intermittent streams. But as long as there's space on the bottom, there's opportunity for good hydric soils and more earthworms. Usually too, I'm going to be looking for adjacent areas on my hillsides, and I never want to neglect those. So if I get in the bottom and I'm not moving birds, I never want to leave the space without getting onto a hillside. And we could have good soils up in that area. That's where I'm looking for my timber cuts and stuff. So normally, you're not going to find, and maybe on some private land and maybe smaller streams, you might find where they've done some cutting on stream beds, but it's really rare, especially on public land. So those riparian areas are very important, to the health of the habitat in the area. So they really discourage a lot of disturbance directly in there or really close to the stream beds. You see it on the adjacent hillsides. Those are important places to check. And then of course those openings too, that woodcock really appreciate having some space in the canopy to get out and either sky dance, feed at night in the open fields and things like that. So that's what I'm really going to target if I'm doing my e-scouting and I'm looking at my mapping programs, is I want to see water features. Over here we have the Sandhills is kind of cool because it's dotted with these little pond lake type things, maybe these 100-acre max, maybe a lot of 20-acre, 30-acre lakes in here. Where you see those, you're going to get some backwater off of those. So in your drier times, you'll get some moist soils in there that may help sustain those birds a little bit. So I want to see my water features. I like terrain because it just helps me focus and hopefully find more density in my birds. But as we spill off of the Uwharries and kind of get into the sandhills, we lose that. And so what we have down here is this kind of web of branches that runs throughout this place. And so as we look at this one, as we look out here, when we can see we're low, and as I talked about coming off the top of that hill, you could feel it, like you feel cooler. There's shade down here. The canopy is much more dense. And then the vegetation becomes much more dense. And of course, from a cover perspective, this is a very secure place for the birds to want to think of being. Also, we're going to have our hydric soils. There's going to be more worms here than there are up here, especially when this is what you got underfoot. So if they're going to have organic matter in the soil, and they need moisture. I think, I used to not, little different feeling of the pines until maybe the last 10 years. I would kind of neglect pine stands. They can be super dense with birds at times, especially if they're adjacent to your water. And then even here, you could spend a lot of time breaking this little piece of cover down, but I would be considering, if I'm looking at that hill, everything from that hill all the way to that hill could be in play. If, you know, for me, if I was just breaking this place down to hunt one day. So I would probably get here, park here, work my stream, depending on which way my wind was going, work in my densest cover, let my dog work it. If I get into birds, I might stay in a 5-acre space for a long time, and just let my dog work very thoroughly. I'm gonna get in and hack in there too. I'm gonna be looking for sign the whole time I'm in there. We'll take a little walk out this way. Just be prepared. We might check for ticks when we get out of this place, and then be looking at where you're putting your feet down in here, because there's potential for maybe less friendly reptile life. But this is a prime example of a place I would stop. I would probably work this really dense stuff in either direction first. When you talk about the succulents, if you look in there, this could be completely off base. I call that wax myrtle. And that might not be what it's called, but I kind of have like 3 or 4 names that I call stuff. It's either going to be wax myrtle, privet, or if I'm in the hills, laurel or rhododendron or whatever. But that waxy look to the leaves, this is going to provide some cover. It's also going to provide shade. It grows in high density. That stuff, if I'm in the sandhills, I see that stuff, I'm thinking, okay, not a bad place to start looking for birds. If you're going to have a banger of a day, odds are you're going to jump out of your truck, work in your stream bed, and be putting up birds pretty quick in this stuff. Now that being said, you might run, and so when I'm looking at this is going to run in a line, and right here we have, which way is it, Jim? I'm not really oriented here, but there's a bifurcation of this stream. We get 2 branches come together. But if I've got, you know, especially if I have a good breezy day, I'm not really going to flow into this stuff too much. I really want to work my stream better. And so I'm going to focus on that stuff, stay in the thicker stuff if possible. If I don't move any birds and I don't see any sign, I will probably prospect out wide, and this is where my dog's going to feel more comfortable ranging. Yeah, and I mean, so when I'm rolling through here, man, like a lot of days when I have a day to come hunt, I enjoy being in my truck and driving through, like across creek bottoms, almost as much as I enjoy the jumping out part. And so I'll have in mind where I want to go, and depending on how hot I am to get out of the truck and run my dogs, I might jump out, do that really quick. If I don't get anything up in 5 or 10 minutes, boom, I'm in my truck and I'm going to the next hole. And then I'm going to start driving across these, and probably many days I'll spend more time just like cruising around than I should and looking and going, not quite. You're going to come back to year after year with woodcock. And the great thing about this stuff is it's never going to mature out. Right? It's not dependent on cutting and things like that to stay this way. And then, like, you know, as this one gets up, you know, these drains through here they're small. They're not really big. So you might have a spring that way a few hundred yards. That is kind of the headwaters of this little drain. And so you might hunt all the way down here, not find a single bird, and get to the tiniest part of the tip of that thing, and there'd just be more birds in there that fit in that place. Or you start up here and you work your way down there and you don't find birds until you get to the bottom. But woodcock are interesting in that a lot of times you'll hunt for an hour or two, not move a single bird, and then all of a sudden they're just everywhere. And I don't really, I'm sure there's some sort of social reason for that with the birds, that they kind of know where each other are for whatever reason, but I can't explain it. I don't know enough about it. We didn't. We never discussed it in the lecture or anything. So has anybody never hunted woodcock here? Has anybody ever, so with woodcock, they've telltale signs that they're in the area. So call it chalk, splash, whitewash. When they poop, it's white. And they're such prolific eaters of worms that they're pooping everywhere all the time. So you get into if you get into a thick area that's been holding woodcock, you look down, there's a really good chance you're going to notice that stuff. Then you can also see some boreholes every once in a while. If you start getting really familiar with what you're looking for, kick some of the vegetation out. A lot of times too, there's a bunch of leaf litter in these areas, and like where you might see turkeys where they've been scratching, I think woodcock will do the same thing to access dirt below. So you'll see little scratchy areas sometimes, boreholes in there. And then of course that whitewash, and it's going to be, half dollar size a lot of times. Could be a little bigger, could be a little smaller. But it's once you've seen it and once you've moved birds in it, you'll never forget it. You'll know what you're looking at when you see it. You can also tell, you come out and it hadn't rained in a few days and that stuff's got a little chalk on it. If it's a couple of days old, those birds may not still be there. You know, so we're really flight dependent in this area more than down east, as Jim kind of alluded to in the lecture, where, you know, those birds, whether or not they're just getting the birds and they sit and they stay there, or they just kind of keep trickling in down east. Yeah, I think a lot of it too has to do with just climate. That down there, it's just, they're less likely to have a hard freeze and frozen soil down there as well. But they will really move. You'll get your like what I call calendar birds. So for me, if I see really early birds, if we have like a late season coming in, I feel like I see my females first. Like, or my first few birds I'll shoot. As the season progresses, I'll start seeing more males. And so you know, there's a dollar bill trick. You can test the length of the bill, but you get, when you've shot enough of them, you just put it in your hand and it's a size differentiation. So the males are, you know, markedly smaller than the females. And and this is completely anecdotal. I feel like I've heard it somewhere else before, but that, you know, the birds that maybe get here before the weather, to me, are more likely to be females. And then as the season progresses, I feel like I start seeing more of the smaller birds come in, and then they're all gone. The migratory birds, by the time they get to us, they burn a lot of calories getting here. And you can, sometimes you get here and you get the fresh flight birds and they're exhausted. You know, and so you might get into a bunch of birds and it's like, boop, and they just pop over here and pop over there. And that to me makes sense, that you're just hunting birds that probably landed that night. They haven't had a time to replenish themselves and get some energy back into them. And so, you know, but there are days where you could get into this place and just feel like you've had the best day of hunting of your life. And then you can come back here the following day and there not be a single bird. I think the Sandhills do better than the Yadkin Valley otherwise. I've got a buddy in Stanley County that's a big farmer, and I don't know anything about cotton farming, but he had a big cotton plot or big cotton field out there, and he sent me a video last year of him driving whatever piece of machinery through his cotton field, like I guess picking or whatever, and there were just birds. I mean, just get one right after the next, and multiples getting up the whole time. The lights on in front of his machine. So. You know, I often wonder how much I'm kind of talking myself into these things, but I feel like those edges at the bottom of your bench can be very productive places. So you might be digging into this stuff and getting really frustrated. You pop out and move a handful of birds along the contour line at the bottom of your creek bed. If we think about what they're doing, they're moving out to feed at night, and then in the day they're going to loaf in the place they feel most secure. Like if we're working this linear cover and my dog's really been beating the tar out of it, and I'm like, I gotta turn around, I gotta walk back out anyway, I might as well find a path to walk out that's ground I haven't covered. Yeah, you know, so your young dogs they need help. They need to, you know, a lot of times they're gonna be where you are. And I've got dogs now, I got old dogs that if I walked out here where we are, they're going to go that way. Dips in and out. Yeah. I mean, once you get in here, it's relatively homogeneous.
Yeah, now I will say that this is probably the most open cover that I would probably hunt. Yeah. And if you find birds in here, these are going to be a little bit more finicky. Either they're here or they're not. The thicker cover that you find the birds in, those are the covers that's going to more consistently hold birds just because of the cover. So if you get in that stuff where if you fall down, you're not going to touch the ground, and there's birds in there, that's the place you go back every year, and there's almost always birds there. Somewhere like this, you may come down and kill a limit in a half an hour, and then next year you may not see a single bird in here.
They're like a lot of pass-through type stuff. And I like it down here because you can make really quick hunts out of this. Yeah. You know, so for me, it's like I said, park, jump down. I'm going to run down there. If I haven't moved a bird, I'm going to move really fast on the edge. And, you know, Pete or Teddy is going to be working really hard in here. And if we get out here and nobody's pointed, by the time I get 500 yards in, I'm going to be like, hey, there's a good chance. There's nothing here. I'm going to go find another spot. I'll get in the bottom. I know you'll get in the bottom, you'll start moving into this stuff, and you're feeling really good, and like moving along clear, and then it gets a little thicker, and you're like, I'll beat into it a little bit, and then you're like, man, this is tough. And then before you know it, you've spent 500 yards killing yourself getting into the better cover, especially if you get into birds as that's happening. And then all of a sudden, it's dusk, and you got to turn around and get back to the truck, and you forgot how hard it was getting into where you were. And so a lot of times it's really nice to know how you're moving in your drain and what your exit strategy is going to be, because these are linear. You obviously don't want to beat yourself all the way back down through cover on the way out, hop up, get in the high ground, and get out, you know, as you do that. And just be thinking of that as you're moving into it. Because there's places out here, these are these small branches. As we go this way, we'll get back to Derby Road. You cross Derby Road, you hit Drowning Creek. Drowning Creek is the headwaters of the Little PD that runs into South Carolina. And so if we think of what the Yadkin, off to our west, running through the Uwaris, comes down, spills out of Baden, goes into Falls Lake, or Falls Reservoir, comes out of Falls Reservoir, goes into Tillery. Now all of a sudden you're running through Rockingham, you're down into South Carolina. It's the PD at the confluence of the Uwharrie River. So now you have the big PD and here the little PD. So we're at the very top of this kind of broad flat that's going to meet the confluence of the little PD and the PD as they head toward Winyah Bay. And so if we're thinking at landscape scale, you know, that's that funnel I'm thinking of. And so when I start seeing my birds moving out of here, that's when I start getting the itch to go visit my friends down in the low country of South Carolina, right? Because I know that's probably where the birds I was hunting yesterday have made it to at this point. But all this, you know, these water features are all moving in those directions, and so that's something to think of. But as you go over there and you get into the Drowning Creek bottom, that's big. And that's where it's much more easy to get disoriented and kind of work yourself into something. And when you get down here, unlike at home, the water's moving more quickly at home. We're getting into really tannic stuff, black water, slow moving. So you're like, I'm going to move downstream. I'm going to actually head out and head back toward the truck. And then all of a sudden you're standing at the river again, and you don't know how you got there. And that thing's meandering all over the place. And so it's easy to kind of lose your bearings and that stuff. But these little ones are much more easy to kind of stay oriented to your water features and your roads. And they, you know, to me, it's a more efficient way to hunt. You get out there and you get in the big bottom. To tackle a space, you're going to have to put more time with your boots on the ground. Here, it is literally, you can hop out, check it. It's either holding birds or it ain't. You move on to the next one. And so it's kind of whatever you feel like doing that day. There's multiple strategies in the way we're going to hunt. There's days where I want to go and just walk in the woods. And I find birds or I don't, and I'm willing to put the whole day into foot travel. And then there's other days where it's like, number one, I want to find where they are now, and I'm not going to spend as much time in my covers. These are perfect for that. Hop in, hop out, go to the next spot. So as you're hunting these areas, those are the kind of strategies I'd be thinking about. Let's go back up here. We'll move along down the edge. In recent years, more quail than I would have ever imagined just west out of here. And so for me, if I get any opportunity to work linear drains as I go west, if I have cutovers and stuff like that on top of my drains, I'm never going to neglect them. You know, and now I'm not a huge fan of just kicking myself into a 3-year-old cutover and dragging myself through all the briars that go along with that. But I definitely will skirt the edge, and oftentimes will be rewarded with a covey of quail as well. Not oftentimes, rarely, but it's possible, you know. And so especially like I would think Montgomery, Moore is not a river county, you know, but Montgomery and some of Randolph, and then if you get to the other side of the river, probably even more birds over there as you come down here. But one good thing about Uwharrie, it doesn't seem to get the public pressure not to cut, so they do a lot of cutting along the river. And wherever you have a cutover in this part of the country, there's a good opportunity there's going to be quail in it. And the problem is they mature really quickly. So you find them one year and they look good, you go back the next and they're really hard to access. But there are certainly quail. So they're good to me, you know, 30 years ago, your woodcock would have been incidental to your quail. For me, my quail are almost always incidental to my woodcock. So I'm just kind of stepping out of my creek bottoms to get up there. And I would still do that here. And if you get close to the field trial grounds, you will get some of their spill-off birds. They do a big pre-release here in September. If it gets really cold, there will be quail in these creek bottoms. That's their thermal cover up here. So Richmond County is a deer dog county. I don't think Moore is. I can't remember though. But yeah, you just look at your regs and you'll know. But you'll know before they get to you that they're out there, especially if they're running a deer. Yeah. But it's it's also like, to Deet's point, I used to get really aggravated by the deer dog guys, and I used to be kind of a hardliner against it in this part of the state. They care about habitat. They love this kind of stuff too because they're pushing all their deer out of that. And so, if you're thinking of private land opportunities, I'm actually a member of a deer dog club, and I've never even stepped foot on the ground there down in Anson County, and I need to. But, some of those places are going to be in your best opportunities for woodcock. And deer season's out January 2nd. So they don't mind, a lot of those guys are open to, hey, I'm just a small game hunter. They're, well, come out, we need somebody to shoot these deer too, but those are opportunities, and they're not terribly expensive compared to what you might spend otherwise to go bird hunting anywhere else in the world. I've had that happen. You'll get a bird up on point, too thick to shoot or something, you kick it up and you watch it away, and then all of a sudden you hear, and it lands like over your shoulder, or especially if you're hunting with other people. That happens a lot when you get those flight birds that are really tired. Somebody will bump one over there, and it's like when they sit down, they're not worrying about you. They'll just sit down at your feet sometime. But yeah, I mean, this is the stuff, especially when you get to the bigger water. You'll get in there. Like I said, I wear my hip waders almost every time I come hunt a place like this. And I'm like, it's below my knee. And then, I'm a little bit further, and then all of a sudden I'm breaching my hip waders, or I cross a stream where it's just right, and then I can't find a place to get back across it. So just things to consider. So I like to use some aftermarket chokes that I've patterned. Those 6s run across the board. I can run them through the full. These are Carlson's waterfowl Delta chokes or whatever. They're a little lengthened in their constriction, and they've from the full. So they instead of calling it full mod and IC or whatever, these are just close range, mid range, and long range. But I get really consistent patterning with those specific rounds through all of those chokes. And so what I'll do is, if I'm going to sit up and just want to squirrel hunt, sit and watch for a while, I'll have my long range full choke in that thing. When I know I'm going to go kicking around for woodcock, I open it all the way up, and then for me it truly, I mean, it would be comical for me to try and tell you guys good shooting techniques. What I will say is, for years, because I'm kind of sawed off and stumpy, I thought I needed like a smaller length of pull than I do, and I did go to a longer length of pull, and my shooting has improved drastically since I did that. So I used to chop my guns down all the time thinking it was going to make me more nimble. And I just listened to a podcast that was like, you probably think your length of pull is probably longer than you think it is. I left my last one factory, and I kill a lot more birds with that than I ever did with the other ones. And it took me a while, but now that feels more comfortable. But I do think most of our woodland bird hunting is going to be instinctive snap shooting. You're not going to get a ton of time. Every once in a while, woodcock will do funny things, like just get up in the air and feel like they hover there waiting to get shot for a while. I tend to miss those birds. But if I don't think about what I'm doing, I just come up and it all happens, and without thought, and that's when the birds tend to fall for me. But a lot of that probably has to do with my cross-eye dominance and stuff. And I think if I was smart about it, I would either learn to shoot left-handed, do something with my glasses or whatever. I would say I think if there's anything I could pass as far as shooting is concerned, almost every time, and if I'm running young dogs in particular, I get kind of hung up on wanting to see where the bird is just because I want to see what the dog's done. like, hey, how far is this bird out? But if I see the bird on the ground, it's almost a guarantee I'm not going to hit it. And that could be different for anybody else. But if I go in there and as I'm getting ready to kick that up, and I'm just kind of keeping my eyes neutral and being ready to react, is when I tend to hit more birds. And so just being at port arms, being ready to draw up and pull that bird down when he gets up. So it's like, people get really hung up on, I missed that bird, my dog doesn't forgive me for it. I don't put much, I don't concern myself with that too much, because I am such a terrible wing shot that my dogs would all be terrible if that were true. So, and some of them have been. But,
Any other thing was on the ammo, 8s or 9s are plenty to kill woodcock, and then you're going to get a more dense pattern, but then you can also open that pattern up a little bit. So if you need help with shooting, go a cylinder or skeet choke with some 8s or 9s, open that pattern up, and you'll get a lot more birds.
Yeah, for woodcock specifically, I actually have a case of 9s at home. For if I got an old 16 that I love to hunt with, and I only fire low pressure 8s and 9s out of that. Not because for the gun, but because I carry that gun when I'm targeting quail and woodcock, for the most part. But yeah, for my utilitarian hunting, the reason I run the 6s is because I'm just as likely to draw down on a wood duck or a squirrel as I am a woodcock, And so, but I have put too many 6s in a woodcock before, and from too close, and, it can be a little hard on them. It's not bad. It's not as bad as I thought it was.
And I would say, as far as the shooting, if you want to really get into be a proficient woodcock hunter, your practice is at your home. Practice just mounting that gun, and if you get a bore sighter or you have a laser, trace the edges of your rim, point at a corner. There's a fly on the wall, target that fly. But just pull up. Don't look at the sights. So you can just take the bead off your gun. Don't look at that. Just look at the focus on the object. Keep pulling the gun up and just practice the mount, because the mount, if you miss the mount, you're going to miss the bird. If you get the mount, you're probably going to hit the bird as long as you're focused on the bird. And so with woodcock, it got that big, long, comical bill. If you focus on the bill when they're flying and you act like you're shooting at the bill, that's what you're focused on, you're probably going to hit the bird.
Aim small, hit small. Yeah. And it's something else I kind of have adopted in recent years is practicing my mount, sitting downstairs. I've got a woodcock mounted downstairs in my house, in my office, and I'll sit down there, pull up and draw on it. And for me, I don't have a bore sighter, and I'm cross-eye dominant, so kind of my test is I'll pull up, both eyes open, mount the gun, and I can't tell whether I'm on target or not, but if I close my left eye, if I'm still looking at the woodcock, I know that I'm in the right spot. So I've kind of trained myself to be a little better that way, but I do think that practicing your gun mount is actually really important.
And practice with your vest and everything else on too.
So, but don't neglect that at home. I'm trying to think anything else specific to this particular area.
And I would say, once you pull that gun up, even if you got a good mount, as soon as you pull that gun up, if you're focused on the bird, just pull the trigger, even if it doesn't feel like you're aiming.
Yeah.
Because that's for newcomers, that's one of the hardest things, is to realize you're not really aiming, you're just pointing the gun. So if your gun mount is good, as soon as it hits your shoulder and you got your cheek to the gun, pull the trigger. Like, if you're focused on the bird, that gun's going to be pointed where you want it to be pointed.
Something that's helped me too get better is focusing on my lead hand and just thinking of that. So I'm pointing my lead hand, and I stop thinking about my gun as much. And so it's almost as if I'm just pulling up, pointing at it. For me, I actually do keep both eyes open, and I started thinking, because I was cross-eye dominant, I'd need to close this eye or adjust it. But your body will train itself. I've gotten better just by simply thinking of it. And I had an old man explain it to me. I was actually in an archery shop explaining why I couldn't do things because I was cross-eye dominant. He's like, if I gave you a baseball, could you hit that door over there? And I was like, yeah. He's like, same principle. He goes, that you got to get that out of your head, that you need to be ultra precise. You need to think of it in that term. And so that's that instinctive shooting people think about,
And if you get in a flight of birds, most people say don't train when you're hunting.
Yeah.
But if you get into a good flight of woodcock,
you can train.
Pick and choose your shooting to reward your dog for perfect dog work, or what in your mind is perfect dog work. where you want your dog to be, because you can afford to let some birds go. And you think about quail right now, $5, $6, $7 sometimes. You got an endless supply of woodcock going down through there. It's going to cooperate just like a planted bird. So you go down there and your dog starts creeping and puts up that bird, definitely don't shoot that bird. You go down there and if maybe you've already got your limit and you want to work on steady through wing shot fall, just shoot, go and flush the bird and shoot in the air.
Yeah.
Or stop to flush. If he does bump a bird, make him stop. And those are going to start paying dividends whenever you go grouse hunting or go out west or quail hunting and stuff like that too. So, especially early season before you can actually shoot the birds, the woodcock are here. That's a great time to just go out and train.
And February.
You could take a shotgun with you because hunting season's in, but you can't shoot the birds. So it's a great time to just go out and get free training birds, essentially. So.
Yeah, so as soon as hunting season goes out for me, I start carrying my blank pistol into the woods. So, and I like that a lot for the young dogs. And this will be their first exposure to when I'm actually arresting chase and things. So stop to flush and hey, you bump that bird, or even if I bump that bird, I'm going to require you to be steady beyond the flush. The first few times, woodcock are really good for that, especially if this young dog has had some experience, had some birds shot out for him, gets really excited in the woodcock woods now. Now I've got this dog that's really driven to go find birds. I've been shooting some willy-nilly birds for you all season, and then we go out, and come February, I'm going to start asking for management.